首先请计算机和网络领域的泰斗 David Farber 来去分享他的60年代关于网络的60年代的故事。然后，行 ，Yeah, yes, please。他是美国开了几年的教授，还有一个说法，他是叫做 the grandfather of the internet。你们可以听看。Yes.
I'd like to talk about two things: the 60s, maybe a little before the 60s, and the future. I think it's important, especially with audiences, hopefully largely younger people, to talk about what the future of the internet is. It's not obvious, by the way, just in case you think so. How do I? Is this the? I'm going to go back a little bit further than this. I was asked to talk a little bit about a project that happened also in the early 60s, mid-60s, at the University of California, Irvine. It was an experiment. Small computers had just arrived. They weren't very powerful. They weren't very reliable. And we undertook a research effort called Distributed Computer System, obviously, to make them act as one computer. So there was a local network, a token ring, and a completely different architecture of software so that you had reliable computing in the sense that you could find a processor, you could find resources on the network, and survive failures of computers. Back in those days, it was easy to get. You didn't have to fake a computer failure to demonstrate it. Just wait 5 minutes and the computer would break. So it was interesting in that it was one of the first operational distributed computer systems, and it was probably the first cloud computer and content-addressed memory computer systems. I bring this out because we tend to forget history, and for those, especially the younger crowd, I caution that those who forget history are doomed to repeat it, and it's happening. We keep reinventing our technology. But I was here largely to talk about the, quote, internet. I'd like to go back a little bit and talk about what things were before the internet. People had online systems. People had email. They just weren't distributed. There were service vendors who supplied you with the capability of getting email within subscribers of that computer system. And that was fairly common and commercially offered. What happened to change that to a very large degree, and I think this is one of the things one has to realize when they look at why the net was successful, is the arrival of the small computer. If you look at the early days of the ARPANET, it was what the network, the internet. I'm not going to use the term internet because the internet didn't start 50 years ago. The ARPANET started 50 years ago. If you looked at that, they were between large computers in academic computer centers. The stimulation for that was a research problem. It wasn't the military, by the way, for those who think it was. It was a research problem of could you build a high availability system to connect together these computers. There was some initial work. We did some. Paul Barron at the RAND Corporation proposed packet-type communications for voice. He wasn't particularly interested in digital voice. So there was preliminary work, and the research project was undertaken to see if you could do it. But it was large academic computing. In the 35, well, actually more than that, about 38 years ago, the NSF funded a project to look at taking the existing ARPANET, which was not the internet. It didn't use TCP/IP. It had its own arcane protocols, but it wasn't distributed environment of which you could send mail to each other, you could send resources to each other by transferring them, so-called file transfer protocols. It was the beginning of the stuff. The NSF funded a project called CSNet. The motivation for that was a problem courtesy of Sputnik, of all silly things, the satellite, the Russian satellite, that the US and others, but in particular the US panicked and decided that it had to start competing in the new sciences. So what you saw around the United States was the birth of endless computer science departments who couldn't talk to each other. These were the days when you paid, what, $1 a minute for transcontinental telephone calls, and you had to reserve them in advance. Not a particularly good environment for people to do research together. And it's very hard to do research when you talk to yourself. You want to talk to your colleagues, but the large number of computer science departments spread out your colleagues. So we needed something to pull it together, and the NSF actually funded a project to do that. Now, it used as part of its facilities the existing ARPANET, again, not the current internet protocols. There were a small bunch of universities and a very small bunch of companies that were hooked together over this initial network. The CSNet connected to that, but it also used a telephone transfer protocol to allow mail and other things to be transferred back and forth. Some of the things that started motivating that was development of various time-sharing computers, such as MIT CTSS and MOTEX, which was Bell Labs MIT research project that actually spawned Unix more than anything else, in desperation over waiting for MOTEX to be actually implemented. Why am I not doing anything here? How do I make this work? Ah, no, that's backwards. Okay. So there, as I said, there was beginning to work. But I'm having real trouble with this controller. Yeah. Okay. About 35 years ago, next December, if I remember correctly, September, Larry Landweber and I took a tape of CSNet software over to Japan and Korea and handed it to some researchers over there. Jun Murai in Japan, he was a student at that point, and I think, were you the person back then? Yeah, okay. And basically said, put this on your software, do call us over the telephone lines, and we'll be happy to connect you with CSNet. So that gave the kernel of activities in Japan and Korea, and for some reason which we prefer to forget, a copy appeared of that tape in China. Remember, the US at that point had deep problems with export of cryptographic, and there was cryptographic information on it. Somehow it appeared. We couldn't connect them directly, so we connected them through Germany and then into the network. So we started having the beginnings of an international community. And I think that was triggered, that's 35 years ago next year. The next thing that happened, let me go back. Sorry for that. Okay, let me now take the next step. At that point, also the internet protocols were being developed, and so there was a richer environment that other than the IMPs, which were the early ARPANET protocols were rather primitive in some ways. The building of the real internet protocols, TCP/IP, came along at that point, but still largely the networks were focused on the academic community, big computers, which is what we had. I tend to blame or credit the explosive growth of the network on the fact that along came a gadget called the PC. And the PC made it feasible to put into the hands of a lot of people, including industry and people and individuals, a decent capability computer. A bunch of kids up at MIT took TCP, the internet software, and ported it over to the PC, and I was using, at that point, acoustic modems, telephone modems, whatever you could get your hands on, you could connect up to the net, and you could have a full set of services. Okay, so the combination of that and then the arrival of the mini computers and eventually the microcomputer, as we know it now, really accelerated that. I think without the arrival of the PC, we wouldn't be here. We'd be looking at a bunch of academics using a nice toy, but it wouldn't have propagated. We wouldn't have the large commercial network. Steve will talk about the commercialization of that. There's long, sometimes checkered history, but what I want to do is look a little bit in the future. That's why I hate slides, by the way, because they have nasty habits pacing you in ways that I don't want to be paced. Okay, yes, okay. I think the basic problem we have now is that what we managed to create is not secure. In the early days of the network, it was a hard enough problem making it work. You didn't care about security. There were, what, 20, 30 people working together. You trusted them. You really didn't pay attention to it that much. And the best example is our mail protocol, which has had a serious security flaw for now 40 years, never got fixed particularly. You keep trying to fix it, but it's hard because you have a base that doesn't support it. That in conjunction with the arrival of other devices which were not very secure. Our processors, the microcomputers, are very, very bad. They have gaping holes in their security, and things like virtual systems are easily bypassed. You know, basically, there were holes in that, serious holes. There have been attempts to fix that, but up until recently, nobody was willing to pay money to have security. Now they're willing to put mildly pay money. Our software systems, both at the internet level, which have, again, endless security problems dealing with domain names, the whole thing, has bad holes which we keep patching. But every time we patch, something new arrives. And the other thing that hits us very badly is that our operating systems are terrible. Pick your choice, whichever you like. Windows has serious problems. Look at the inter-arrival rate of fixes, most of them for security. Apple generates a security fix, what, every couple of weeks? That's not a stable environment. And yet we're using that to deal with critical resources. Resources that are critical in many ways. You see up there the Cyber Civilization Research Center. That's a KO Institute that Jim Ryan and I are co-chairing, looking at how the cyber world affects civilization. And it does. Civilization changes every time a major technology happens. Insecure environments are dangerous for both the security of the individual and potentially the security of nation states. And one of the efforts that we're undertaking is to look at what we're calling the cyber silent spring. We're looking at the serious possibility of a cyber incident escalating to more serious levels. And it can happen very easily. We've already seen signs of it escalating in several aspects. But without a secure environment to base it, to run this stuff on, we're in trouble. Do we know how to build a secure environment? Absolutely secure, probably not. Do we know how to build one that's much more secure? Yes, I think we do. And probably it's time, and I'm really addressing the younger crowd here, it's time to also realize that things have changed. The current internet was built for relatively slow, relatively faulty communication systems. A lot of stuff is in there to handle errors, retransmission, all that stuff. That ain't what we have now. It's very rare you get an error on a system, on our transmission lines. And in fact, if you look at the physics of it, packetized communication may not make much sense. Packets really have to be fairly long now, and sometimes they look like virtual circuits. So there may be time for a complete rethink of the environment. We're not going to replace what's out there now. There are hundreds of millions of people sitting happily using their systems. But for those applications that are critical, like financial, defense, power systems, that stuff cannot reliably exist when people can come in and cause damage. And that, I think, is the major problem we have, that we have to pay attention to. And it's not going to be done by magic. The other thing is, I'll make one more attempt to, okay. There was a reference on that, which I'm not going to try to go back to. There's a talk that I gave at KO when I thought had to happen, and if I can ever get back, well, anybody who's interested. Yeah. You know, I could get to this like this. Anyway, that's why I don't like to use slides, but I'm sure that somebody will put up the URL. The other thing that's happening is much more hard to predict, and that's the threat, the possibilities, take your choice, of things like quantum computing. Quantum computing is an interesting area. We don't know when it will happen. It will probably happen seriously. What applications it has, we don't understand very much. But there's a gut feeling in a lot of people's mind that they will have applications. We're seeing some very pragmatic applications dealing with cryptographic key management over over quantum links. But those are not the main thing. It's the ability to build large-scale quantum computers. We don't know how to program them. We don't know what the problems they solve are. We do have a strong feeling that, in fact, to use them, we're going to have to couple them with conventional machines. We've gone through that before several times in the computer history, where we built a very strange machine that did phenomenal things, but you had to couple it with a standard machine in order to drive it, feed it data, etc. There's a strong feeling that we have to do that with quantum computing. How to program it, how to build those machines, we don't know. But there's some huge research opportunities there. And that's probably one of the hardest problems. That and security are the two hard problems that are there. The more serious problem, and then I'll probably shut up. I lost track of my time, so tell me when I run out of time. I'd like to go back for a few minutes to two things and get across the seriousness of the international situation we're in. We have a very powerful environment that allows us to do a lot of things. It allows nasty people to do a lot of things. And it is very difficult to understand where those nasty things come from. They can come from individuals, they can come from criminals, they can come from big nation states, and they can come from small nation states. The results of that, unless carefully thought out, could cause people getting affected to respond in an escalated fashion. That's dangerous for all of us. And there's a lot we can do to minimize that. And we have to attack the security or we're going to be in serious trouble down there. We also have to understand how to respond to those threats. We don't. I think no nation does right now. We sort of keep our fingers crossed. That's dangerous. So both things, and maybe they can supply the references. The talk I gave at KO, which is on the KO website, on security, I think is interesting. We're actually going to hold a quiet meeting to see how to go about doing something about it. And the talk by Rodney Van Leer, I guess it is, I can never remember his last name, who's an expert on quantum computing. We had a fireside chat where I think you'll find some valuable insights into the potential and the problems of getting into the quantum computing world. I'm going to shut up and hopefully have some time for questions after.